years. RD Dikeman, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
All right, man. Thank you very much.
It's such an honor to host you. There's certain episodes of podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time, but there's certain episodes that always really stand out to me as being quite special. And I will never forget the episode that you did on Dr. Sean Baker's show. I don't always listen to every episode of his, but I generally really like what he does. And for whatever reason, like that's one that I remember listening to. I remember where I was listening to it the first time, hearing you get so fired up about your son almost dying before you even knew what was going on. And it really like struck home how difficult type 1 diabetes is to manage. And so I just have to say, like, after hearing that, I believe it was January of 2023, I've been trying to follow you and your work and get on top of learning more about this because this is a crazy issue.
I remember when I was on Sean, you go through this sort of catharsis of remembering what it was like to be diagnosed and what you're told and struggling to implement the stuff that you're told and then finding out, this alternative method and going through all the pushback that you get to try to make sure that your child stays healthy. And when you start talking about that, I get very emotional. Even still, it is really such to be newly diagnosed. It is such a traumatic experience, and because a large fraction of the time, people that are newly diagnosed have a child who is in mortal peril, and your life changes completely after your child is diagnosed. So when you remember those times, it is an emotional experience, and there's something interesting about grieving as a parent of a newly diagnosed type 1, because right away, right out of the gate, when you're diagnosed, it's kind of like having a newborn in some sense. When you go to the hospital with your wife and you give birth, 24 hours later, you bring that newborn home and everything is different, right? And type 1 diabetes is the same. It is a 24/7, 365 experience. And it's all over you right at the beginning. So when you think about that, even 10 years later, I'm doing it right now. It is a truly traumatic experience, and there is no time to grieve. You have to perform immediately because of the condition demands that.
Wow. Well, I think our listeners can tell by listening to your voice, and the people watching on YouTube can see clearly on your face, the emotion does hit home for sure. You can kind of understand a small fraction of how emotional this would be and how this would have gone for you. I would love to take credit for this. It was your idea, so I'm going to give you all the credit for it. Today, we decided we're going to create a kind of resource maybe for people, parents especially, who have children who are just diagnosed, where I'll try to be asking the best honest questions that I can. I also have a list of questions that people from the TypeOneGrit page and your page have put on there, and they are questions from honest parents who are trying to figure some of this stuff out. So we're going to try to cover that. I think that was a great idea, and I think that would be a great resource for people out there, and nobody better to explain how the dynamics of this work. I recall you on one podcast saying, like, yes, you came across Dr. Bernstein's work and his book, and it was huge, and it's a big encyclopedia, but it's also not the like, do this, do that, practical, this is what you need to do today. You had to kind of discover that on your own. So I think you're going to be a really great resource for that. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today. But obviously, first, I would really love to hear your personal story. I think the audience would really love to understand how this all came to be. Again, I've heard you describe this as like it drops off a cliff so quickly. And like you said, like you don't have time to try to figure out what's the best way forward. You have to act very quickly. So do you mind taking us through the story of, David, your oldest, excuse me, and his diagnosis?
Yeah. It is, it is, You know, when I think about the diagnosis of Dave, what even even back then, and you know, social media was just sort of getting started. So the first thing you're trying to do is, you know, and I'm skating right through the whole Dave had DKA, he almost died. You know, that story is very severe. Dave's diagnosis was very severe, and Roxanne and I didn't know anything about type 1. So we were not in tune with what was going on. We had no idea. So Dave was very close to dying. And that is not an unusual experience. It's on the spectrum of experiences. So some people are familiar with type 1 and they catch it right away, or some people are lucky to have doctors who can understand that things are going on. But a lot of people have doctors that fail them and they don't know anything. And the as you said, you go off the cliff so fast. So in Dave's situation, which is not atypical, he lost, I don't even remember, 10, 15 pounds. He was a 9-year-old, or so he lost so much weight so fast that it took us off guard. We didn't even, you know, we were just going about our business. We didn't even know, you know. And at first we when we started talking about it, we thought, well, maybe Dave's going through a gawky stage or something like that. So, you know, you have that experience, but then when you are diagnosed and you realize that, you know, your doctor or a doctor is telling you that your child has type 1, the natural inclination is to learn about it. And you're going to get some punctuated lesson from your doctor. You'll be put through kind of a mill like experience where you're given maybe a handout. You meet with a hospital dietitian. That's pretty standard. We'll talk about that. But what we didn't have was a, you know, what now resource. There was nowhere to go for us. And that really bothered me, and it stayed with me. And that sort of predicts the arc of my next 10 years of advocacy, where we were trying to generate materials so that people could, and not just newly diagnosed people could learn how to manage their disease properly. And to be blunt, and we'll get into it, people are being taught an incorrect method about how to normalize their blood sugar and remove the threat of complications. And as Bernstein would say, the standard method is geared towards high blood sugars and complications. And that's a mathematically provable fact. And what we are doing is different than what's being taught. There's a never-ending amount of there's a infinite amount of inertia behind this method that doesn't work. No one is incentivized to change it, and you have to go outside the boundaries of the standard practices to learn how to save your child from complications of diabetes. And so, you know,
Wow.
I'm always sympathetic to create a resource that newly diagnosed parents or people with, or not parents, people, it's the same method, can have. So that was like the idea behind the theme of this chat that we're going to have.
Yeah, I love that. So to help set that up, you talked about the system and the things that are recommended. Tell us what that experience was like for you. Who sat down with you? What did they say? What were your thoughts? How did you approach things? Like what was the standard that was given to you in the beginning?
Um, well, okay, so Dave was very sick, and near death. He had to go to the ER. There's a huge story behind that, but it was he was minute to minute, from dying, right? So it was a really acute situation. And I say that because what it does is it underscores how vulnerable we were as parents when your child is that sick and you are when you have no I had no idea what type 1 diabetes was. Uh, like I knew something, from TV, like sometimes they have to take candy and there's insulin, and I don't understand any of that stuff, and never had to. So, it just washed over to me. So that's the environment. That's your origin. That's your initial starting point as a parent or someone who's newly diagnosed, is maximal vulnerability. Okay. And then so you're in this supine position to just accept everything an authority will tell you. And that's what happens next is you are lined up with an endocrinologist, who is going to give you some kind of cursory discussion about how to manage type 1 diabetes. We were told, he drew in an easel. Very nice man, by the way. He drew on an easel. Carbs make your blood sugar go up. Insulin makes your blood sugar go down. The goal is to balance these guys. You might go up a lot during breakfast, come back down. I have the picture still. Then you go up at lunch, come back down. Then you go up at dinner, come back down. He told Dave, if you go too low, you have a hypo and you can die. That's too much insulin. If you stay high too long to avoid the hypos, then you're going to get the complications of diabetes. So there's a balancing act, right? And you take insulin. When you eat carbs, you're taking a set amount of insulin to try to keep things level. And the famous quote is that Dave said, well, I just won't eat carbohydrates then. And we laughed at Dave. I laughed at Dave, in his hospital bed. We chuckled, well, Dave, you want to play sports, you need energy. Kids need carbohydrates, right? And that's a profound moment, because it is just one, but a big one, of the 10 to 15 to 20 myths that you're going to have to punch your way out of to get out of this standard care model. Because there's many more myths that are going to stop a parent cold from ever exploring any other way out of this standard myth, set of a standard method. And that is, back in the day, there was no resources for us. So I had to, for every one of these myths, I had to do research on my own. And a lot of it involved talking to Bernstein, and we ended up making videos. I've got to make videos about this because people need to have these resources. It's tough to go through your book and just read the book, right? So that's one of it, is that the kids need carbs for energy. That's like the starting point for the myths that you need to question to get out of this. You're literally, the standard model is going to put you in a death spiral, and that's going to ruin your life. And if you want to escape that, you have got to educate yourself. You have to learn how to break out, and then you have to learn all the things that you need to know to actually implement this alternative method. Let's call it an alternative method, which, but we'll talk about all that, what it really means, what you have to eat, and how you use insulin and all that.